Script. Yay, Script 2020. Yay. We are here as a team. This has been quite interesting, and Scott has some wine there. So we are here finally through all of our COVID unrest and everything. How amazing is that? I was just telling my husband though, oh my God, like I said, oh, we're gonna have 8 sessions, remember? And we're gonna have 8 sessions and we'll probably, just have about, I don't know, like 10 speakers or something like that, and 100 people will show up. We're at 377 people that are just registered, and we have, what, 50 speakers? Oh my God. What is that, right? This is just gonna be so insane, tomorrow. And so Aquil, we figured Aquil could kick it off because didn't do our invited speakers dinner, but all the turn of events that have happened, like, make this like an incredible journey to talk about male survivor trauma and violence and just violence in general, right? And I was talking, hey Catherine, to Sheriff McDonald, and he's gonna hopefully instill us with a message of hope, and then go into the panel talking about a lot of the issues that are going on today. So with that said, like, I am just happy and excited to be here, and we are definitely going to have Aquil do the opening and kick us off. So one thing I do ask you is our etiquette before we begin is that please mute yourself unless you're talking, and then we will definitely have times for questions and answers when this is over, but please make sure that you're on mute. But if you want to keep your camera on, that's great, because it makes us feel like we're all together through all of this. All right, Aquil, you have co-host, and you can also share your screen. So I'm going to go on mute unless you're talking to me, and we can also talk back and forth through chat if we need to.
Let me get my screen up. Okay.
Oh, and stay on when we're done, because you'll get some directions for tomorrow also.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Let me get you where I want to go. How's everybody doing? How is everybody doing?
They're nodding at you because they're on mute.
Oh, everybody. Well, it's good to see everybody. Good job, everybody, on another year. I think the Script conference is so timely this year because of what's going on from a local, a national, as well as an international perspective. And so it's really amazing that we're all here in this moment, and hopefully we can raise some people as we raise ourselves to a new standard. What I'm going to talk about probably for about 45 minutes to an hour is just the concept of comprehensive community mobilization, human development, what that looks like, etc. I do want this to be an open conversation. I'm going to present some components. I'm going to show a couple of examples which are related to violence, which are related to individual transformation, etc. Develop some of the framework of what we've been able to do both locally, nationally, and internationally. And just as Deborah said, get a kickoff, energize us, and hopefully we can go into the next 2 days progressive with the type of urgency and energy that we need to create some win-wins at the end of the day. When you talk about community mobilization, I just wanted to show you guys a small video here of some of the work that we did in and still doing in Newark, New Jersey, and how the collaboration process came into being. Now, this one video here is specifically related to the violence that they were having, but then it broadened out into so many other components. We're violence experts, but we have to tell people all the time that's only one part of the componentry. If you're not dealing with the holistic symptomatic root causes of what causes an individual to use a antisocial means to be heard, then you're not doing anything but putting a Band-Aid on. So the whole gist of this video is not to concentrate on the violence, but to show you the framework of community mobilization and what can happen when it really works together, and it is played out with the right people, with the right context. So here we go.
Developing tonight now, a violent night in New Jersey. Avenue and Garside Street left one man dead and a second wounded. Christine, this has certainly been a very busy night for the Newark Police Department. Just within the
we begin to organize our lives around trauma, as opposed to organizing our lives like other human beings, you know, around success and productivity and our dreams. We organize them around fear.
The Newark Community Street Team is the mayor's community-based public safety strategy. The vision is to employ residents, non-traditional leaders, as interventionists, as mentors, as outreach workers, to be able to engage and resolve conflicts to a peaceful end.
We cannot arrest our way out of the problem. The void that the police department has, the Newark Street Team fills that void. They can be in locations, they can be speaking to people where police officers are either tied up on different investigations or assignments, and they can't be there. So it's very important that the Newark Street Team has that relationship with the community, and on the other end has the relationship with the police department.
So we have a strategic partnership with Rutgers that produces data for us, and one of the things that we discovered is that 62% of the murders in the city of Newark in 2015 were all relationship-based. We do safe passage around local schools, high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, making sure that our kids go to school safely and that they come home safely.
Yeah, I know my kids. You can't just be a random stranger on a corner telling my kids to move on. It impacts the students, again, several different ways. One, they feel safe. They know there's somebody there to have these relationships with, not with just them, with the community members. We have some different folks out there. We call them our neighbors that are, kind of scary at times, but we know the street team built the relationships with them, and they know it's almost like a no-fly zone.
They see things that we don't see. They talk to people that we don't talk to. I think that they gain the trust of the community quicker than the residents gain the trust of the police officers.
One of our kind of guiding principles is that the individuals that we hire to work as outreach workers have to live in the neighborhoods in which they serve.
And that's investment to give them training, to give them education, to give them skills, and to provide an infrastructure so they can use that training and use those skills so they can feed themselves, their family, so they can feel useful, not only to themselves, but to their community. Use some of the very same people who were responsible even for how the demise of the community. You now turn that on its head and teach them how to use the same skills and talents that they have developed in these community, basically for doing something negative to begin to do something positive.
The outreach workers, they own this work. We work through the Safer Newark Council. The city for 2016 had a 12% reduction in homicides and overall violence in the city. First in 50 years. We do mentoring through a case management model. So each one of the outreach workers has 3 to 5 clients or mentees on their caseload. Through the mayor's office, we have a pool of 15 jobs for high-risk individuals who are returning home from jail to be able to plug them into those opportunities, because that first 6 months sometime when you come home is the most critical.
But they also have the kind of mindset and the kind of direction that says, I'm trying to stop this problem. I could be an asset here. My life can be an example to other people's lives. I can use my pain to help somebody else avoid having pain of their own. And then they go through trainings, so that they can take what they feel emotionally and what they know anecdotally and put it into something scientific and systemic, so they can actually treat what's going on out here in the community.
We need the public to be a true partner. And it's like in any partnership, there has to be trust. And I think over the years, there's the trust decayed. However, we cannot do it alone. We definitely need partners in fighting crime and fighting violence and restoring quality of life in the city.
So, before I go on, any thoughts on what you just saw, people? Any thoughts on what you just saw?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Outreach folks, any type of backgrounds investigation goes into their selection, or they're volunteers basically, right?
No, they're actually city workers. Yes, a background check does go into their employment, but there's a variety of workers that are utilized. Some are on stipends, et cetera, but yes, they all are cleared.
Okay. And it didn't say, maybe you're going to get into it, but what type of calls did they respond to, or do they respond to? Non-violent calls?
They respond to a cross-section of calls. They respond to calls related to violence, calls related to individualized trauma, calls related to community imbalance, et cetera. They're all professionally trained. They're professionally trained by my organization and others. They also are in the hospitals in Newark. So there is a compilation of expertise that they have on board, and that training is ongoing. We've been working with them for 8 years now, coming out to Newark at least 4 to 5 times a year. There's other people that are also in the training circle. They all have a background in credibility in those neighborhoods. So they do have the relationship, but we realized a long time ago, and especially in the work of comprehensive community engagement, that relationships are just not enough. You have to have a collaborative approach when you're dealing with people's trauma, when you're dealing with people's crisis, and when you're dealing with violence. I think people get confused as it relates to violence. Violence is systematic. Violence is not the root cause. And if you're only trying to stop the violence, you defeat the purpose, because at the end of the day, you haven't dealt with the root causes that caused the individual or the individual communities to use that violence. So we've got to get much deeper than that. Yes, we want to dam the violence on the front end, but once we dam that violence and get some of that blood stoppage to happen, now we got to peel that orange back and look at what is in that community that is causing these individuals to use the symptomatic approach of violence, and why do they feel comfortable doing that? So again, for the sake of repeating myself, it takes a cross-sectional collaborative approach of expertise, as well as making sure that that community takes ownership of itself, and you're just not there leading them. You have to get them to a point to where they take that ownership so they can feel empowered, so they can feel they can make change happen.
Aquil,
Well,
you know, go ahead, Captain.
I was just going to say, I do like what you said about treating the symptoms, because if you don't treat the symptom, you're not going to get to the greater cause. It's like a disease. It's like an illness. You got to treat what's causing it. So
You are spot on. You are spot on, my friend, spot on.
okay. Dr. Warner?
Me and you have many talks about this, Aquil, and you came on my show, Dr. Deborah Q&A, and we talked about this, but in hearing you say this, how would we get key stakeholders like the government or police or, the powers that be to understand exactly what you're talking about? Because we have all this rioting going on, we have all these people, and they're saying that they're being violent, but a lot of times they're doing it in peaceful ways, and a lot of times the reaction is violent, right? So how do we get them to tune in to what you're talking about? Because I'm at a loss to even explain it to my son,
Well, that's a very good question, Deborah. You get people to tune in by showing them the common denominators as the work and how it affects them. See, we don't speak the same language time and time again, and we dehumanize each other. We operate from a vision of ourselves. We operate from a narrative that we've been given all of our lives, and usually we create the infrastructure for that narrative to play out. So if my narrative has been very limited and focused in only my perception my reality, my neighborhood, my ability to survive, etc. That's going to be my story that I'm going to buy into and believe of myself. I have got to be able to see your story. I have got to be able to see what drives your normality. I have got to see and broaden my perception to where my perception is not only focused on me and my specific needs, but I see as I said earlier, a cross collaboration, which is much broader than me. And so if I can get into your world and see some of the things that are affecting you, and then try to establish those common denominators that whatever discipline I'm in, I can see that there are things that are inherently parallel between the way you think, between the way I think, between the other person, that it might not be in alignment with our thinking process, but at least understand the rationale of what their thinking process is, then I'm going to be able to humanize you more. When I'm working with law enforcement, and I'm glad we got the chief on board, I'm glad we got the people that represent the public safety issue. You know, one of the things with public safety, we've got to put the public back into public safety. The public has been removed too long, so their narrative is not being brought to the table to the degree that it should. So by bringing them back in, we're able to frame our public safety narrative around the inclusion of the community, and therefore, as we drive policy, we make sure at least that they have a voice at the table. We've taken in certain things into consideration, not necessarily that we're going to buy into all those things, but at least we would have showed them that we value what they think and that we appreciate them being at the table. So to answer your question specifically, Deborah, we have got to stop looking and thinking and operating from our normal and broaden our normal to where that normal ingests other people's normal. Then once I can see within your normal narrative, I can look for those common denominators that link us to some form of humanality. And then from there, I could kind of feel your pain. If I'm only operating from my narrative, I will never feel your pain. I will never feel what you're going to. If I cannot feel it, I cannot see it. If I cannot see it, I cannot react to it. If I cannot react to it, I cannot make it better. And that's where we're currently at in this environmental structure of the day. We have got to become much broader in our thinking, much broader in our collaboration, and start building the systematic process to where we put systems in place instead of people-driven process, system-driven processes that are going to allow us to create templates for communities to operate from and take ownership by. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's like changing a worldview and taking in someone's perspective. I always use the word ethnocentric, right?
Yes.
So if you can stop being ethnocentric, right, that means taking in someone else's perspective, then it will create a rippling effect macrostemically, like bigger, right? But people don't realize that because, you know, my husband always laughs at me because he'll stub his toe and I'll go, oh. Instead of saying, oh, did that hurt? I know it hurts when I stub my toe, right? I never put the two together. I go, oh, because I'm always thinking, well, maybe he needs a Band-Aid, but I'm not having any empathy there because I'm already on, well, how do we fix it rather than looking at how he's feeling, right? So I think the rest of the world is doing that too right now. They're thinking about, well, let's fix it, but how is that feeling? And that's what's happened, especially with the whole movement of Black Lives Matter, all of that. People have not stopped and said, how does that feel from someone else's point of view? Rather than just making a program or making a task force, right? And if you can do that, you can see how they're maneuvering through an environment or a system that has set up roadblocks because you don't really have a feeling, an empathy, an ethnocentric point of view, you know?
Well said, Deborah, well said. And it might just be because I have never stepped out of my box. I cannot even interpret what your pain is. See, when we look at marginalized communities, when we look at traumatized individuals, when we see communities that are imbalanced, et cetera, there are certain inherent factors as well as external factors which causes that community to be the way it is. And with those factors being in place, those factors cause pain. If I can't deal with my stress, I become distressed. If I can't deal with my distress, it puts me in a state of crisis. If I'm in a state of crisis, it's going to be trauma that's going to be developed from that crisis. And if that trauma is related to violence, now I'm in a state of compound trauma. Not only do I have to deal with my everyday trauma of the normality of being a normal human in this society, I've got to deal with the related factors of the violence trauma that I'm also dealing with. So now I got two levels of trauma stacked against me. When you look at marginalized communities, there are certain wants and needs that are not being met. Whether you agree with those needs or not, that's not the concern. If you're going in to assist somebody, it is not from your perspective. You are going in to build a bridge to see how these people are in pain, and your goal is to try to relieve that pain. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to side with what they're doing. No, if you don't like what they're doing, you've got to attempt to provide options that they can brace onto that can get them to change the psychological direction of where they're taking. The goal of somebody that is coming in to try to assist somebody that is either in crisis, traumatized, or using the methodology of violence to accomplish certain goals, we are trying to stabilize and anchor those individuals. That is the key. We're not trying to, in the short term, just create the ability to put a Band-Aid on what's going on and then say the process is done. No, that's why in this work, you've got to be committed because it takes so much and you don't know how much time has to be brought on board. Luckily, in some situations, we might be able to get through some trauma in a couple of weeks, a month. But most of the time, that's not the case. And the deeper a person's pain is inflicted, the deeper we're going to have to pull back those peelings off of that onion. And in the process of peeling that onion, you know what happens a lot of times. We cry. So we're going to ingest a lot of that same trauma that we're dealing with. Most of us who deal with trauma, who deal with crisis, who deal with dysfunctionality, who deal with aggression, we think we are immune to this. We don't realize we're picking up some of the same trauma that we're trying to solve. We might not show it externally. I think the only thing a lot of us have to our advantage is we have more safety nets of resiliency that when we bounce, we can bounce back up a lot quicker than a person who was marginalized can bounce back up. In a lot of situations, those marginalized people, they do not bounce back up. So that's a part of the larger process. We've got to see differently. We got to think differently. We got to stop going in with our expertise to dictate the normality and the direction of what that community says, and let them take hold of the issue using our expertise in alignment as they drive a process of ownership and self-healing. That has to be our goal. Well, it doesn't have to be our goal, but I will tell you this. We have worked this systematic structure in cities all over the nation, as well as countries internationally. And we have certain common denominators that we go by. We have certain things that we do that has created some degree of success. And I'm not trying to say we have all the answers, far from. I look for those issues, problematic issues, because those problematic issues make me go deeper. They make me search. They make me pull out things that I don't know and don't have and try to create answers. So I'll leave it at that on that point.
No, preach it. That's why, you know, you got that Dr. Aquil Basheer after your name now.
Yeah. But you know, Deborah, I will say this, and I'll say this to all the listeners. I've constantly been a student of life. And my education, I would never trade my education in terms of the understanding and integration of people. This is where I've learned the most of what I've learned, because it's not in a textbook format. It's not laid out from each hypotenuse where you come up with the answer based on the logical conclusion to get through the hypotenuse. No, in life, it ain't that easy. In life, you got to adjust. In life, you got to sit back and listen. In life, you got to learn. I don't care what level of education you're at and how much knowledge you have on board. The more you learn about life, the more you realize you don't know, and you need to sit down and be a student of life, because you will never learn enough in this life to have enough to say, I have got this thing mastered, bar none. The more I know, and no arrogance meant, I've been around the world numerous times, training in numerous countries, helping them build their public safety structure out, the human potential development component out, etc. And the more I travel and the more I engage, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know much sometimes.
Yeah.
I've realized, I realized how much I didn't know when we were in Geneva.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm walking down the street. This is true story. And I'm like, this is nice. He goes, dude, we're in the ghetto. We're in gang central. Do you not know where you? I'm like, no, it looks nice here. He goes, how many times you walk down here? I had no idea where I was and what I was doing, you know, and you can't know everything. You know, you just have to be open to everything so that you can learn.
Yeah. Well, you know, we Dr. Warner, far too often we listen with the intent to speak. We don't listen with the intent to hear. And you'll be surprised how much you miss by not hearing. You know, with our young adults, that's one of the biggest problems. If you look internationally at what causes them to become antisocial, it's two things they always say: lack of inclusion and not having a voice. Really simple, but yet so hard to accomplish.
Yeah.
So any other questions from anybody before I flip away from this slide?
I do. I think about Aquil and the relationships that he had going in and how you legitimized him by having PCITI training. But I think about Minneapolis and St. Louis and other places where there's not that connection. And so how do you go in and apply that template that you've created somewhere like Newark and Los Angeles into an area that doesn't have that connection, where it seems like a bigger gap?
Well, it's not that hard, Scott. When you look at those common denominators, which I referred to earlier, see certain communities, and I had to learn this the hard way, especially when I started traveling internationally, because I would end up in places like China, Africa, Hong Kong, the jails of El Salvador, etc. And I said, if I'm gonna go in here and do anything, and we were called into all these places, if I'm gonna go in here and do anything, I have got to find some type of systematic template that can work in these given communities, to where I'm not starting at the ground level each time I come into that community. So, you know, it took me about a year, and we went into deep strategic development in terms of our thinking process, et cetera. And so one of the things we came up with was the ability to identify these common denominators, which are prevalent in most of these communities, whether it's in China. What in China is the same in South Central LA? What in Africa is the same in Seattle, Washington? What in the jails of El Salvador has the commonality of Washington, DC? And we were able to identify a series of common denominators that became our foundational reference points. They didn't build out the whole structure and system of what we were coming in there to do, but they did give us start points, Scott. They gave us the ability to go in not blind, because we knew certain things were relevant to those communities, and we had built certain processes, proven scientific processes that were able to get results. So we were able to, in these areas, start off the ground with these components that we knew would give us some instant successes. And then because of those instant successes, the community bought in. Now, once we established that foundation, then we had to tailor what we do or what we did to the needs of that community. So it became, now we're going to build out almost the concept of all the skeletal structures are the same, but as you put the muscle and meat on, it takes a different look. That's what you got to do for each community. If you try to go in from the ground level and start from foundation, you are going to be so far behind, and you're going to have to play catch up through most of the process. So you got to go in with some pillars already in place that are going to guide you in certain directions. Then you build out that machine, you build out what you've got. And then the third step is you've got to have the community-driven process to where that community starts to believe in the process and take ownership of the process, as I mentioned earlier. Once they take ownership of the process, they take pride in the process. They want to lead the process. And the last component is you need to know when to do what we call a strategic retreat. You need to not stand in front of the process because you helped build the process and try to lead the process throughout. You've got to let that community take hold and take the driver's seat in that process. And then you become a managerial asset to them as they move through the process. So it doesn't take you knowing the individuals in there necessarily, Scott. It takes you knowing how to address some of the trauma and some of the cancer that is going on, and give them some both short-term and then hopefully long-term processes that are going to be able to anchor them and give them real solutions. We have been very fortunate over the decades, because I've been doing this work for over almost 5 decades now, to where most of the time we go into these communities, we're known. Most of our work is word of mouth. So we're called in across the country, across the globe, because we have established certain benchmarks in place that speak to what we do. But that's not every community. Some communities we were blind, just like when we hit the jails of El Salvador. We went through all 7 jails. We were called in, and we were called in because of the gangs wanting to establish one of the most fundamental truces that has ever been done out of that country. And we were there to log that, to validate that, and take that back to the States and show them what was happening. And we had to navigate. Just a little story. We get to the outer pinnings of the prison system, and then the guards would not go in. They told us to go in, and they locked the gates behind us. And they said, well, they wanted you here and they invited you. Now you got to navigate. So we had to, on the spot, create some processes that was going to work for us to get us through that. And luckily, everything worked out well. We were able to provide some key components and help them build out a process.
Thanks.
Any other?
Yeah, great response.
Thank you. I think I can show you another quick little slide to kind of get to your point. This is in Washington, D.C. And it's going to be the last video I'm going to show you. I wasn't even going to show you this, but I will, based on what you said. We did not have the relationship with Aquil, but you're going to see what caused us to go in here and do what we did was our training mechanism. Our training mechanism gets us in and out of so many venues. Let me show you guys this real quick.
Other news, the stories are heartbreaking. Young lives lost to violence, and the people behind these crimes are often gang members. A 14-year-old girl was stabbed and beaten to death in Prince George's County, and police say a gang tied to MS-13 is to blame. But before we get to that, let's talk about some solutions. Sometimes police aren't the only answer. A group with a criminal past is doing what they can to make our community safer. Here's Lorenzo Hall.
Stupid, like it's just stupid. Like dudes had issues over the smallest stuff. Females, you might stepped on my shoe or something. You might looked at me the wrong way. Like my father could have just died. I might be going through something right now, and you worrying about how I'm looking at you. Like
on these streets in Southeast DC, Chauncey Anderson says he had to carry a gun, even as a teenager, to protect himself and his friends in Woodland Terrace.
Like you might go to school and there's guys from different neighborhoods in the school. You might got a problem with this neighborhood. Something might go on. Like at school, you're gonna fight at school, but after school, you know, it might change.
With his gun at the ready, he often spent hours on this block after school.
It wasn't too serious. Like I ain't never get shot. Got shot at plenty of times, but luckily I never got hit.
He was arrested twice, first at 15 years old, caught carrying a firearm. That's when Chauncey realized he had to drop his weapon and aim for better. He had a son to raise, and at the same time, many of his close friends were being murdered.
There's a lot of lives being lost over the smallest stuff. Like I got friends on my arms that I ain't gonna never see again.
However, one friend who Chauncey says came at the right time,
All right, love you. Love you more.
Dwayne Cunningham. Dwayne went to prison at 18 and spent 10 years behind bars for smoking and selling crack on these same streets in the 80s.
A lot of us judge people.
Dwayne is now one of DC's 26 violence interrupters, walking the streets in some of the toughest neighborhoods, trying to identify and stop conflict before it turns deadly, like we saw in Clay Terrace last year.
It's a lot of trauma that's going on in their heads that they don't talk about, and they're so used to it. So when they do get mad,
is like rage. So far, there have been 58 murders in the district, surpassing the murder rate at this time last year, which is concerning. 2018 was one of the deadliest in a decade, with 160 people killed.
A lot of those people were from my neighborhoods. One of them was my best friend.
Robert Butler is another violence interrupter with the DC Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. The agency is seeking out people, mostly with a criminal past, who are now positive influencers in their community. The pay? About $45,000 a year.
Yeah, I need to contact them today.
Robert admits, even with his history of using drugs, his neighborhood contacts, and street knowledge, this job is still tough.
It's really life or death, literally. Guys that I mentor have been arrested, some have been killed.
Well, if you can't help me, man, get out of here. Get out of here.
To help, the team recently took part in a week-long training conducted by a man known around the world for his violence intervention programs.
I'm tired of this.
Aquil Basheer knows what they're doing is dangerous. He's helping them strategize so they can effectively get through to people or groups on the verge of committing a crime. Violence interrupters say police really aren't trusted in many neighborhoods, so you won't see them working alongside officers in most cases. Instead, they're operating off of referrals and information passed along by people who trust them in these communities.
Go to school every day.
Violence interrupters are embedded in at least 20 neighborhoods every day at every function, and also host their own events like India Blocker Ford,
Soothe your mind.
who spends her weeknights working with young girls and boys, whether it's meditating to practice stillness or modeling to boost confidence.
They've been going through a lot.
She says the kids notice. A 6-year-old girl in this group was shot just a few months ago. One boy's brother was killed, and another kid committed suicide.
Like you just hear all the violence going on, all the commotion.
I'm there for them. You know what I mean? I can be their shoulder for them to lean on and cry on.
It's tough to gauge how many murders these violence interrupters prevented in the first year of this program, but city data shows they've connected roughly 130 people to resources after tragic events, in some cases to prevent retaliation. They've also successfully negotiated 5 ceasefires between feuding neighborhood groups. One of their tactics include bringing in people they've helped, like Chauncey, to show a life of crime isn't the only option.
Everybody get into a little trouble, we used to beat people up for fun. But it sounds like now that I'm older and I look back on it, it's crazy. Like, that's wild. Like, why would we do that? But, like, when you're in the hood, it ain't that much to do. Like, that's what happens. Stupid stuff. You do stupid stuff.
Now, I want to say something real quick. And if you want to chime in on those, you can. But one of the things we get confused about, both of those videos were related to violence. It doesn't matter what the crisis is. You don't concentrate necessarily on the actual crisis or the trauma. You have to have systems that can systematically address whatever the crisis is. This is where we go awry. See, we're able to deal with the violence, but we're also able to deal with the community destruction. We're also able to deal with the self-hatred. We're also able to deal with the lack of equitable services. We build out systems to go into these venues that we go in, and this is really what community mobilization is about. Community mobilization is a true call to action. It's a call to action based on the fact that there needs to be certain focused precision response for something that is going on in that community. And when you think community team, you have got to think what? A community is made up of the individuals. So if you're not dealing with the individuals, if you think holistically from the perspective of community and don't think individual, you're never going to get community resolved, because again, those individual components which comprise that whole community are not being dealt with. So as you step into the process, there has to be some type of template that deals with mental violence, that deals with interpersonal aggression, that deals with self-hate, that deals with the inability to see a level of greatness and have hope because the whole external structure around me is not allowing me to do that. I don't have the skills to raise myself to a different level. This is why it's so imperative that in a collaborative process, you have to have the broadest collaboration as possible. What a true achievement-driven collaborative unification force, our team is going to do is bring as much expertise to deal with as many of those community and individual needs as possible. I'm constantly building out my collaboration because I realize I'm developing and have developed in years ago a toolbox. And I'm trying to put as many tools into that toolbox that afford me the capability of making the best judgment calls that I can make. Because I realize my ego is not my amigo, I'm able to ingest new information from cross-sectionally anybody and wherever it comes from. I look at new information as additional tools that I can utilize somewhere in the process. So I'm always open to build out. I'm always open to try to restructure and re-strategize. And I think the most important thing when I step into a given community, regardless of the flavor of that community, regardless of the color of that community, regardless if it's a fluent community or a community that is struggling, I still look for the needs in that community and how can I address those needs? Do I have the tools to do that? What system am I going to use? And then what process am I going to use to get to the end day where it's a win-win for me helping them and for them being helped by me? Any quick thoughts on that video before I move on? Okay, I'm gonna move on. Go ahead. Did I hear something from somebody? So when we're talking about community mobilization, let me show you this slide to look at the process of what goes on. First of all, and we sell stress way too short, in my opinion. Stress is that core factor. Stress is like that fuse to that bomb, which if it's not defused, is going to somewhere in the process cause that bomb to explode. You have stress, and then it's the inability to recover. If we don't have some type of answer to that stress, it turns into distress. If that is not dealt with, it turns into crisis. I alluded to this earlier. Then if the crisis is not dealt with, usually a mode of action is going to be taken, and time again is violence, because that gets the quickest answer, it gets the quickest recognition, and it causes the most fear. It causes certain things to happen. And then we have the last part of that, which is our trauma. Take a quick look. Hey, looking at all them components that I just listed, the inability to recover, what does that lead to? That leads to no healing. If I cannot heal an individual, that individual will not be able to develop a routine. A routine is something that causes a person to be able to deal with a traumatized state, because routine brings back commonality. When you look at a situation where somebody has been extremely traumatized, those people, they always want to go back to do something that they feel comfortable with. Walking a dog, doing the clothes, doing the dishes, etc. And it seems unorthodox to us, but they go back to these points because those points in the past created normality in their mind. And in that normality, they had some degree of functionality. If I can't develop a routine, then I create no function. I feel I have no function. If I have no function, I feel I have no purpose. I'm not purpose driven. And so with that, I can never stabilize myself or anchor myself if I feel I have no function. If I feel I have no function, a lot of the time, what will parlay with that is a degraded self-hate. I don't like what I see. I don't like who I am. I don't like what I'm bringing to the table. So anything that I visualize is of the same reflection as me. A lot of times I'm going to dehumanize it and want to destroy it. Sometimes I will never move on that, but it's in my mindset. This is why the violence in so many communities, especially the interpersonal violence, is usually of the same ethnicity. Very rarely does it go outside of that ethnicity and create the type of damage that it does internally. There's a lot of self-hate. When people are marginalized, when people are going through a set of crisis and dealing with trauma that they don't know how to solve, they want some type of relief, some type of pain. That's the healing process. If that pain never comes, they become more aggressive in their tactics of wanting to achieve that pain. And that's where so many of your antisocial functions come into play, because people want to feel some degree of ease through the pain they're going with, and they feel that they don't have any options. I don't know why we make this so hard. This happens around the globe, people. I've seen this in the worst of the worst countries. I've seen this in the best of the best countries. Now, I'm not saying that there's no flexibility here. I'm not saying that you hold to this to the letter. What I'm trying to do is give you a generalized infrastructure of what has been worked on an international basis to create some type of long-term solution building through the process. Okay. In that same venue, we have to look at how we build things out. If I'm engaging in a community, let me give you a down and dirty overview of how we operate. First and foremost, we'll go into that community and we'll make individual and community assessments. We look at, hear from, watch, and see what that community is doing. Time and time again, those of us who claim to be experts, we run in there with binders on, with our own perception, with our own vision, and because we're bringing something to the table, and especially in marginalized communities or with marginalized people, there's a false norm that we have some degree of superiority. Just because a person in a state of trauma doesn't mean that they are not intelligent and don't know what's going on with them. Usually those traumatized people are the best people to engage because of that trauma that they're dealing with and of the pain that's related to that trauma. So I'm going to go in and make an assessment. We're going to go in and try to learn as much as we can about the individual and what's going on and what's causing that pain, what's causing that stress to happen. And we're going to analyze, do we have the expertise and the capability to engage it? If we don't, we're either going to stand down and bring more expertise to the table or try to devise plans that will be able to deal with that situation, or pass it on to somebody who is more equipped to handle it than we are. Once I have a plan, then I'm going to try to identify the crisis needs and wants of that given community or that given individual. If I can figure out his wants or her wants and needs, I have the capability of solving those wants and needs. Then I got to analyze, can I do that? Do I have the right people on board, et cetera? If I can function to some degree, or whatever happens at that point is going to help me develop a method of operation. Based on those needs is going to give me the capability to see what type of systematic plan that I need to put in place. Once I have somewhat of a method I'm going to utilize, have my clear-cut goals in terms of what I want to do, now I'm going to help develop my strategies to do them, then I have to identify what my triggers are, and that's why that circle is so big. My triggers are so important because they're usually going to be the things that cause this whole engagement to explode. Notice I didn't say risk factors. Risk factors are danger indicators. Risk triggers are those specific things which actually cause that bomb to explode. Once I can identify those triggers, that's going to help me to develop my strategy of nullification. How can I nullify these triggers? How can I defuse this bomb to where it won't explode? And then if I can't stop it from exploding, how do I minimize the damage that it's going to cause? What do I need to do to isolate? What do I need to do to make sure that I'm safe, my team is safe in the process? Once I'm able to deal with those triggers, then that's going to give me the ability to take the actions that are going to afford me the ability to stabilize this situation. Remembering my long-term goal is to stabilize, not in the short, but in the long term. Then we're not even done yet. If I can stabilize the individuals, the community, or the entity involved, then I got to create now a wellness plan for recovery. I've got to get them to restore, to get them back to a state of wellness to where they feel good enough about themselves that they don't have to fall back into the same methodology that they were a part of. Then from there, I'm going to try to draft out a template that can be used not only in that given community or with that given individual, et cetera. I now have to create some type of system format that has been proven because it's worked through an actual engagement process. And now I use that as a template to take to other communities that are affected by some of the similar things. In that process, I am going to mobilize my community to help me through as many of these stages as possible. And that's where it takes being able to, and especially in that assessment process, identify some of them key factors, what we call familiars in a given community, that are going to give me the ability to see what that community is made of, the flavor of that community, what the culture of that community looks like, etc. I'm gonna throw you one more slide, and then I'll open the floor for conversation. I know I'm dropping a lot on you. With that said, one of our key factors and what we attempt to do, again, back to strategy. My broader long-term strategy is, as I said, detection of those risk triggers. What are those indicators that are causing the individual or the community to be on a state of explosion, to cause that trauma to increase, to cause that violence to be augmented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I can detect, what that's going to do is give me some type of clarity. Then I'm gonna move on to my other long-term or really short-term venue here. If I can create that clarity, I know I've got to alter the individual thinking process. So my strategies, my actions are going to be to create some type of alteration to get these individuals to see a different picture of themselves, a different picture of their environment, a different picture at the end of the day of where they're at. Can that be changed? Can you move through that process? If I accomplish success there, I'm gonna move into the next area, which is the modification of patterns. I'm gonna try to get them to change their behavior norms. I'm trying to get them to change their actions and behaviors, and I'm gonna do that by providing viable options that they can buy into that are going to get them the same results of what their actions are currently getting them. And so that's going to help, in my mindset, develop some key expectations and some key objectives. If I'm able to get those on board, then I go to that bottom area to where I want to create short-term stabilization in the moment, long-term stabilization, and then anchor that stabilization and create the certain safety nets. If those individuals, for whatever reason, flip back to that way of life, we create some type of resiliency for them to be able to bounce back up from and know that there's an infrastructure in place that when they fall, they're able to fall forward because there's something there to catch them in the process. And again, that's where me and my team and the collaboration will be there as an augment, but they're not to drive the process. If we don't get them to embrace a formula, when they come back to the same negatives that caused them to be and do what they've done, they're not going to have the process to work through them. They've got to know, excuse me, that there's certain things that they have embraced that they can look within themselves to or their communities and say, we can make this change happen. The last slide I want to show you real quickly for the sake of time is, hopefully I have it here. This slide here. So real quickly, when we enter a community, there's even a way we have to do that. People don't understand the importance of this. When we were in Geneva speaking at the United Nations, we were called in, as Deborah just told you, she was there. We were called in to speak to the international experts across the globe. They were having problems going into communities that were war-torn, that had serious immigration problems, that had violence problems, that had interpersonal hostilities going on. And they looked at our model and they wanted to utilize or know how they could utilize a simulated version on an international context to help them. So what we did was we put together a visual for them to make things extremely clear on what that would look like. One of the first things we told them, when you enter a community, you have to enter through the front door of that community. That means you have to respect the culture of that community, not just the external cultures, but the culture that drives that community. You have to go in with that humbleness to go into that community and show that you're willing to respect whatever that community is presenting. If they're antisocial norms, then you create a narrative to work on those norms to redirect that, but you don't go in there from that perspective. You don't go into a gang community and expect that community to stop doing what it's doing overnight. They're gonna run you up out of there and they're gonna laugh at you. You have got to develop a relationship to where they can see you have an understanding and they can put some trust in you because you see what they're going through and what their needs are, and then you slowly draft out a process to where eventually we get them to change direction. But that's because of trust, relationship building, and you've presented something that they can buy in. Then once you go through the front door, once you go into that community the right way, you specifically identify what those needs of that community are. And then you attack those needs. You don't say they need D, Y, and F. If they have shown you and that community says these needs are relevant, that's what you deal with first. That shows that community that you are in alignment with them and you respect their envisionment of themselves. You cannot see the picture when you're stuck in the frame. Then once we identify those needs, we don't try to come into that whole community and change that whole community overnight. Look at what it says. Issue areas. We look for certain hotspots. We look for certain areas that we can develop demonstration components and create some, hopefully some quick victories to where we can show that community, we are really here for you, trying to work with you, trying to change things for your betterment. Then if I'm able to identify those issue areas, I move on to my familiars. What familiars are in a given community are, they are not shot callers or power brokers, but they're individuals who can tell you the flavor of that community. A prime example would be the man that's had the store in a community for 20 years, the principal that's been at the school for 15 years, the lady at the cleaners who's been there for 30 years. They know the flavor of the community. They usually know who has power in that community, etc. You attempt to develop relationships with them, and they are going to get you to the last component, the power brokers. Usually the power brokers will use a community familiar as a venting venue. New people coming in the community trying to do some work, they'll be vetted through the familiars. The familiars will tell the power brokers, yeah, this person has some credibility, or no, they're not. They're just coming in here to try to use the community. Once I get to those power brokers, we develop some type of relationship. Let's say they buy into what we're trying to bring, and we're ready to move forward with something. Then we want to build a collaborative or a comprehensive network. This is where my collaboration and my community inclusion comes in full bore. The fact that we have got the key indicators in the community are letting everybody know that we have some validity and credibility, and they're willing to at least give us a shot to attempt to do something. Then I'm gonna build that larger community network to where that creates that safety net, but it also lets that community move in unison and become a community-driven process with our expertise. So again, I've dropped a lot, people. I'm opening up the floor for any thoughts, any questions, any feedback, any disagreements. You might have some thoughts of your own.
I have a quick question. I'm not disagreeing, but after your team moves out of a particular city, you said that this is sustained. People are the people that you've empowered, so to speak. They're able to continue along your path.
Yeah, what we do once we leave a city, once we come in and train a city, we leave infrastructure, we leave certified experts in that community. Remember, at the same token, we're working with the public safety system. We're usually working with the municipality, and we're working with human services if they have a human service component on board. Once we leave that community, we don't just leave them. That community becomes a larger part of a safety alliance that we've created across the nation. So we have Newark talking to Los Angeles, talking to District of Columbia, talking to Seattle, talking to Maryland. They all become a part of that infrastructure. So when they see certain trends coming down the pipe, when they see certain things going on in their community, they have the ability to reach out to that safety net. We return normally on a yearly basis for recertification training, but we also have quarterly collaborative meetings, and usually a new community, they'll be on the monthly call with me and my team for about the first 3 to 6 months, and then we wean them off. But we have built a network across the nation in a complexity of cities that are working as a collaborative alliance to work together to achieve some of the same components of that community ownership, community resilience, etc. Did that answer your question, Miss?
Yes, it did. You know, we're concerned about sometimes programs that are implemented in the community.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, everything kind of collapses after a while.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of time from community, law enforcement, resources that community groups bring. And then you find out that after so many years, it just kind of dissipates. So I
Well,
was just curious
no,
as to
you're
how to
you're
maintain.
you're you're spot on again. That was one of the reasons when we created PCITI International back years ago. One of the reasons we did that was because of just what you're saying, you know, and especially with community groups. So many of the community groups were coming in based on their relationships, et cetera, saying that because they had ABC in these relationships, that they were some of the only ones that can deal with the real issues that were going on. Unfortunately, a lot of municipalities bought into that. Real people who are bringing real templates to the table, that are bringing real structure to the table. The things right off the top of the list that they want is they want ongoing evaluation. They want validation. They want their systems being looked at by others outside and those systems constantly being proven. We put in place PCITI because there was no professionalism, there was no accountability, and there was no real operational protocols that were being developed to validate how and why a person or persons were able to do what they do. So we had to establish that. We built a manual of operation, a series of manual of operations. There's operational protocol, behavioral standards, administration protocol that all of our people abide by. All of our people that are local, you know, they have their own identification cards and codes. Our people that are national, they keep the semblance of their organizations, but they they have lapel pins that define that they are PCITI certified. We hold our people to an extremely high standard. We have to, and we know that we're the only ones that are going to be able to enforce what that standard looks like. So our people are held to a high standard. Lastly, we purposely will work with the municipal structure if they have organizations already on board. Time and time again, we're called in to certify them and then also refine their operations. So many of these cities, fortunately, have the human service component on board, and we engage within that public safety nectar. All of our guys are first responders. We have trained so many of the fire departments, emergency responders in some cities, the police departments, and how to engage in community interaction. And so we bring all of those components to the table, and that creates that ability to stabilize these people. And then we work to get them, if they're already in the municipal system getting paid, that is truly a benefit, because it is not a situation where they're hopping for survival money at that point. Money's already on board, just like you heard in the video with the violence interrupters in DC. You know, they're part of the county structure. They got a $45,000 annual job nexus that they operate from, et cetera. So we try to bridge as many of those on board as possible. And then the accountability measure, just staying with your people and making sure they're doing the work, they're in motion, they're in collaboration with the people. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's easy. It's not easy. It takes hard work. It takes a lot of resiliency. It takes people that have bought in from a collaborative perspective, and you have to constantly work to improve that, et cetera. We're fortunate. We're operating with probably a 87% inclusion rate. Some of the cities we've been working with, Roxville, Maryland, we've been working with them for 11 years. We've been working with Seattle for now about 7 years. We've been working with Newark for 6 years. We've been working with some of these cities for durations of time where we come in. We just did the Credible Messengers development and training for 12 organizations out there and their mental health department, et cetera. And we graduated over 60 urban safety credible messengers. So we're able to build these tight-knit collaborations that are system-driven to accomplish certain things that the city as well as the communities want. We've been fortunate, but I cannot say we were nowhere near as effective in our early years. We have seriously failed our way to success.
Well, let me ask this. You mentioned all of those cities and Seattle. So isn't Seattle still in a mode of violence and demonstrations over the most recent community police eruption? How does your city fare? You've gone in, you've done all this work, you established all of these community partners. Now an issue, something happens. How do they fare after your work? Because Seattle is still, as we hear on the news, I don't know if that's true, they're still kind of on fire about police brutality and unrest. And do you send your people back into that community, back into that city?
That's a very good question. If we're asked to, and let me frame the first part of your question, how do our cities fare? It's according to what we were called in there to do. Time and time again, we're not called in there to come in and engage in all levels of the city infrastructure. Sometimes we're called in just to come in and train and certify their people. Sometimes we're called to come in and help them redevelop or add inclusion to their public safety system. Some cities were called in to help them build out their hospital engaged intervention component, et cetera. The cities where we've had some of our best success, we've been brought in a much broader collaborative scope, just like Newark, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia in the ONE's office, excellent results there. Roxville, Maryland, excellent results. What's happening with Seattle and other cities right now is most of these cities do not have the proactive structure to engage the type of violence that's going on. This has been so new to so many of these cities. Most of these cities now are implementing knee-jerk reactions. They don't have, unfortunately, the infrastructure to really carry out so many things. In Seattle specifically, what transpired there was once the protests happened, they let them have that little one area. We were actually called in by Mariko Lockhart, who runs the Civil Rights Division, and asked what can be done and how could we assist them in the process. And we gave them certain things that we felt should have been done. We gave them certain components that we felt they could have operated by, but it was a much larger Lexus going on. The mayor had bought into the community, the leadership of the community groups, which was a very false leadership because there was no real central leadership there. And that was one of the biggest problems. The demands were coming from so many areas because they purposely did not want a centralized leadership. So the mayor was reaching out to who she could to come in and do what she felt needed to happen. And there was just a whole lot of mass confusion. We did end up training a whole new corps out there, which were their community passageway individuals. Actually, we were training those individuals at the time the outbreak happened. They're currently being utilized to go in and assist with what's going on, but we were not brought in for the larger infrastructure of what that city is attempting to do. Had we brought in, could we have made a change happen? I think to some degree, yes, we could have. Would we have brought all the answers to the table? By no means. There is so many things infrastructurally. There are so many things from the perspective of the communal buy-in. They've got a lot of issues still before them that they are going to have to totally engaged. And one of those things is the mayor's credibility also. So there's a multitude of things going on. If we stepped in and we were called to act, we would identify certain smaller components and try to get some small victories out of what's going on. I think in just giving you a quick example, one of the things we told them to do was when they had the CHOP outfit to where they were there with the 8 precinct, et cetera, we told them we would suggest that they find a vacant piece of land and temporarily lease that vacant piece of land to the demonstrators to where they could have the same type of a safety hub temporarily, but get them out of that downtown area, get them away from the police station, et cetera. For whatever reason, they didn't buy into that concept, so what transpired continued to transpire.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I think Bobby Hyde has a question because his mic was undone. Bobby, do you have a question real quick?
It's not a question. Yeah, I guess it's a question. I guess it is. Yeah, I guess it is.
What's your question?
Oh,
yeah, I can hear you.
Doctor, what part of your community activity goes into the courts when children are placed in orphan homes and taken from families, and it's a constant systemic problem with judges and courts and the whole law structure of a city. It goes on in every city. Mm-hmm. So how can you lessen the load on these judges, these courts?
That goes into the larger part of the collaborative process I was talking to all of you about earlier. We're in the detention centers. We actually go into the prisons. We work within that prison system. I train credible messengers across the nation. Credible messengers, that's one of the things they do. They build relationships with the judicial system to work with these young boys and these young girls to be able to create some type of equitable service capacity while they're within that system and when they get out of that system. I just need to warn you, we can't do it all. We're not going to try to do it all, and we don't do it all. That's why we build out the larger collaboratives and partnerships. Another thing from the advocacy perspective, we work with the Safety and Justice Organization that works across the nation to advocate for the people within the judicial system, victim services, the whole compadre, so to speak, in terms of trying to build that larger nexus. So we try to partner with as many organizations that we can that are really doing outstanding work, so we don't try to drive the whole process. Hell, we couldn't drive the whole process if we wanted to, team. Another prime example would be, in terms of that collaborative process, and Deborah will allude to this, we created an engagement with Deborah and Dr. Warner and her grad students at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, where we had a core of her grad students go through our training institute and learn those street engagement, community engagement, mobilization tactics, et cetera. And in turn, her students ended up teaching a lot of our students trauma-informed directive care, how to engage from a solidified foundational perspective. So we do cross-training with as many people as we possibly can, work to understand their protocol as we possibly can, and try to build those larger safety nets. But you are so true. I mean, within that system, we have got to, and that's where the preventative component comes into place. We engage from a preventative component, from in the moment component, and from a recovery component. So we just don't look at the engagements per se for what they are, us stepping into engagements, us dealing with the engagements on the spot. We look at the actual incident and post-incident, going back to what I alluded to earlier, those root causes. And lastly, to land on that, that's also why, again, I told all of you earlier, we will never take the attitude that we know it all. We don't have all the answers. We don't have the toolbox fully tooled at the end of the day. So as people come up with better ideas, with ideas we haven't thought about in relation to some of these needs and risks of these communities, we are always open to see where our expertise can either partner, can either assist, or can either lay some type of assisting foundation to help create a better nexus at the end of the day.
And Aquil, real quick, just for some people who may not know, can you give a blurb about what exactly the PCITI is and how it was founded a little bit? Just to make the breadcrumbs come together?
The Professional Community Intervention Training Institute International was an institute that we developed decades ago. It actually was birthed from the Urban Safety Crisis Survival Center that we actually started back in '72. We've been into this work for over four and a half decades, and the PCITI specifically was developed off of the Urban Training Institute to deal with the urban violence that was going on, the gang violence that was going on in the 80s, etc. We built it with that focal point to where we took the majority of the major shot callers in the neighborhoods and get them to put down their guns. We have an 18-week institution that we were able to bring in our first class. We had over 60 warring neighborhoods at the table that were able to come in on our credibility, and then they become strategic thinkers. They become proactive peace builders. Again, that's where the World Health Organization, we were also in Geneva at the World Health Organization to help them draft their peace building and peacekeeper program and what it looked like. We helped them create the white paper for that. So again, coming in and creating these community peace builders that were able to deal with not just the gang violence. It started with the gang violence, but we branched out to deal with all components of violence, aggression, trauma, etc. So we would come in, they would be professionally trained. In that training, we bring in a collaboration of expertise outside of our core expertise, and we brought in law enforcement, we brought in fire department, we brought in mental health, we brought in these other components to give an overview and broaden the minds of the individual participants. They graduate from the program. They're all professionally certified as professional peace builders. And then that basically is a foundation. PCITI is only one component. That's our training component of our larger 501c3, the BUILD program, which deals with a comprehensive human potential development. It deals with, we have community sentinels. This is where we take our young adults that are within the prison system, where we take our young adults that are on the streets, where we take our young adults across the board, and we create these comprehensive succession plans for them to come in and be able to act as liaisons in the community, working with the different components of the peace builders, of our advocacy arm, of our victims arm, etc. And they're able to learn what that process looks like. Simultaneously, they're able to look at the concerns in their community and become young problem solvers with the resiliency of the backup of the elders that we have on board. So we act as safety hubs. Also, that's the secondary thing. And lastly, I'm gonna land on this. We create safety hubs in our community. Our headquarters, which is the old firehouse on Vernon and Normandy, we work hand in hand with the Centurion organization, which is a Black firemen's organization, which propagates the eradication of oppression, systematic racism within the fire department. And we partnered with them probably about, I want to say 19 years ago, When they were given the old firehouse, the councilman at the time said he did not want them to use this as a clubhouse. They would have to bring comprehensive community programs and expertise in there. They reached out to us because they knew that was our expertise, and they use their expertise to act as a resiliency of anti-racist eradication. And we've been working together ever since. Again, utilizing the larger public safety structure and system to help drive a lot of the process of processing, of what we do as an organization too. So, and it's much more. You can go to the internet. You can Google my name, PCITI. Certain things that jump up at you and give you much more than my little words are giving you right now.
It's very true. You can Google it and find out all kinds of stuff on there. And there's footage, there's films, there's books about Dr. Basheer that you can actually look up and find. So Aquil, what is the end of your presentation? What's your summary in all of this? We have about, it's 7:32, so we have about 32 minutes to wrap all of this up.
Well, and this is not going to take long at all. You know, saving lives, restoring communities, providing hope, implementing proactive solutions through self-determination and self-reliance can be accomplished. That's my end goal. Whatever we want to happen in our communities can be accomplished. Whatever we want to do interdisciplined from a societal structure can happen. Whatever we truly want to see at the end of the day can be built. But I would say with that, we've got to be truly committed. We have to put a public service over self-service. We have to really understand and be there to serve the targeted population we want to engage. We have to put our personal perceptions to the side and really be driven by something which is much larger than all of us. If we only doing what we do for our own acknowledgement, for our own self-anointment, then we really got to question the rationale of what we're doing. I would say this to all of you, and most of you, I should say probably all of you, some of you I just don't know, I respect highly. You're doing some outstanding work in that process to be even in this field of human potential development, of raising people and raising communities, of sacrificing so much from yourself to engage traumatized people. I salute, a huge salute to all of you. But we cannot lose focus and thought, and we cannot lose the energy in the process. Too many people tiptoe through this life. We're trying to avoid the pain. We're trying to avoid the trauma, etc. We are going to be pained. We are going to get knocked down. We are even going to get floored. We are going to be challenged when we really stand up truly for the level of dignity and greatness that we bring to our work. And all of us have our signature tied to something. I would say this, let's make sure our reasons are strong enough for what we do. Because if our reasons are strong enough, our reasons are going to be our rod and staff that are going to get us through anything when we hit the ground, when we have those failures. So if we can stay focused on that, if we can realize that we need to be purpose-driven, if we can put our communities first, if we can understand that we're here to leave a legacy, and that's all we're going to leave here, it's no telling what we can accomplish and how far we can go. We can get some real solutions to some of these issues at the end of the day and make a whole better environment for not only ourselves, for a whole lot of other people. And I'm going to land on that.
We can. Absolutely. We can make a whole.
This conference is one of those key strengths to that. And that's why I'm always in it 1,000% and support what's being done. It is things like this and a lot of other things that a lot of you are doing that are really going to get us to some real solutions at the end of the day. So don't lose faith, don't lose thought, don't lose your energy. It's an old saying that says, action leads to motivation. Motivation doesn't lead to action. I'll turn it back over to you, Deborah.
Whenever you say things like that, I get a brain twist, like trying to sort all that out.
I'm just keeping it real, my friend.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. But you know, I hear you saying all of this, and I think that this beautifully ties into everything that we have going on the at the conference. And for tomorrow, you know, it's going to hook in due to all of the community unrest and due to all of the stuff and all of the pillars that you're talking about, you know, within the community. And I want to send it out one more time to see if anyone else has any more questions for Dr. Basheer right now.
And please, there's no off limits on your question, team. I've probably heard it all, seen it all, and and had to deal with it to some degree. So anything that anybody wants to say, drop, or any of your expertise that you want to add that will assist what has already been said.
Yeah, I have one question. I know I've been asking a lot of questions, but
it's okay. I see Bill Murray there too, who's been holding back.
If you see a city that's dealing with issues, for lack of a better phrase, do you reach out to them or do you wait for them to contact you? Because probably a lot of these law enforcement agencies may not know of the work that you do. So, for example, Chicago, you know, there's a lot going on over there as well. Would you reach out to them with your services and resources and things that you guys can do for them, or do you wait? How does that happen?
You know, that's another very good question that you bring to the table. It depends on the city. We will always lend our services automatically because, again, our goal is for the betterment of individuals, the betterment of the community. But in that process, I would add two things that lends to our decision. First of all, I would never sell our wares as if we're trying to sell something to you. And a lot of the municipalities, when you bring them a certain degree of expertise, and time again is how you bring it. We're savvy enough to know how. Yes, we will reach out. The second thing is if that city has certain components already in place and they're really pushing those components and it creates imagery in our mindset where they want to stay within that structure and really don't want to go outside, we won't. Then lastly, a lot of times we will wait until there's an axe there because, you know, a lot of people will not understand the necessity until they realize there's an actual need. So you're batting up a wall sometimes when you say, hey, we have the ability, we would love to come in and work with you and assist, blah, 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 blah. It's almost as if, you know, they don't need that because either they think they got it handled, they don't really see the need. You'd be surprised at, and you probably wouldn't in your capacity and how large you are and what you have done, but you'd be surprised how many people, how many leadership components really don't know the essence of the destruction that's going on in their cities, and will tell you time and time again, there are no real issues here. So that's kind of a three-part answer. Yes, we will do if we think we can, if we think we're going to get some ears and we think it's going to help you, we will definitely reach out. A lot of times we won't if we see a self-contained, for the lack of a better word, arrogance to where people feel they got it. And for those that just don't know, a lot of times we will send our expertise through others that they're affiliated with to see if we can become some type of augment in the process. But now I have to say one last thing on that. You know, our services are not free. I mean, where we can and come in and many communities, we have helped for no charge across the board, et cetera. But one of the things we have found out quite succinctly in over 40 plus years of doing this work, some people will use the hell out of you, okay? And so in order for us to survive, we have to make sure basic needs are taken care of, the needs of our people are taken care of, et cetera. You know, one of the things, well, I won't go there. I won't talk about our great city of LA, so we'll leave that alone. But it varies, and we will try to help any way we can. We will reach out when we can, and when we can't, if that city is really in need, we will try to get some type of word to them that, hey, there's some external forces out here that are willing to assist if you're open to that.
And we have one last question. Scott has a question.
Hey, Scott. Yes.
Hey, Aquil, it seems like some of the difficult conversations that you're having with people that don't necessarily want to have the conversation or may not know they need the conversation are similar to what the social justice movement needs to accomplish. It's dealing with people that lack information due to ignorance, due to kind of incomplete background. And so just kind of on a general scale, what's your thoughts or suggestions on approaching that, on broadening those discussions and helping people that have had limited information or misinformation, may not be anxious to have those conversations, but may not be so far gone that they can have those discussions and be brought around to go, oh, well, of course that makes sense. I just never looked at it that way. I never had those sort of discussions with people in a different community. I never knew people and understood what that culture difference is, or whatever those other barriers are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in Huntington Beach, so we're struggling with how to respond to things our neighbors are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, I want to be brave and try to open the dialogue, and then I go, maybe it's pointless because they're just so rooted in their beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's but yeah, I'm struggling with family members and neighbors and
Well, then when it gets into being city officials and stuff, you go, well, no wonder, you know, it's kind of like the country, is the leadership is pointing people to the wrong direction, but at least it's bringing out the openness of racism and the vastness of the problem. And so, okay, good. Now that that's on the table, let's go attack it.
No, Scott, you both are spot on. Look, those conversations are essential. We have to understand within those conversations, there is going to be pain. There is going to be certain things that are going to be said, which some people don't want to hear on both sides. But you go in knowing that. What we need is strategic community conversations. I'm the first one to push sitting down at the table and dialoguing. I will even sit at the table with my enemy if they truly want to have some conversation. I believe conversation is so important because, again, that's how people get to know, are able to see, and are able to look into the normality, as I started this conversation with, of other people. Without conversation, we're not going to get nowhere. Without conversation to really humanize each other first. I don't have to love you. You don't have to love me. At the end of the day, all I want you to be able to do, and what I want to be able to do, is walk away from that table respecting one another. We're not going to necessarily come to agreement on all our ideologies, on all our philosophies, etc. Remember I said earlier, the way we think and what we do is usually rooted in the imagery we believe about ourselves, what we have been fed about ourselves over decades of being in this world. And that is not going to change overnight, one way or another. But what will change is if we look for the commonality of the benefit that would expose itself to both of our operations, or if it's more than two people, to everybody involved. We've got to look, and I don't want this to sound milquetoast. I'm not talking about that at all. I have got to truly understand you, your needs, what your complications are, what you disagree with me about, and how can I possibly create some type of differencing in that thinking process when I engage you. You've got to do the same thing with me. Usually a conversation, you're not going to get much established in that first conversation. We have got to know each other. We've got to build a relationship. We have got to develop some degree of trust as we move through the process. That could take a day, rarely does. It could take weeks, or it could take months. But if I'm able to value your opinion, if I'm able to understand your narrative, if I'm able to see any commonalities that might exist between us, and I'm able to respect you as a person, knowing that I disagree with 90% of what you said, I'm able to humanize you. And if I can humanize you, we can go anywhere together at the end of the day, because we value what each of us are bringing to the table. And that takes critical, comprehensive, true conversations. And I think everything starts with the conversation. So I would say hosting some basic community conversations, community roundtables. That also needs to be done with the police department and the public safety system. We need to have public safety roundtables where the public safety individuals are being brought into meetings within the community structure at different locations, truly talking and engaging with that community engaging and talking with those individuals. That's where your core starts from, and that's how things are going to be able to be broadened and move forward to some degree of hopefully alignment somewhere in the process. But you've got to have those critical conversations. You can't be afraid of them. You can't run from them conversations. You got to meet them head up. You got to know, you got to let people know that you're willing to have those conversations, and you got to be firm in those conversations. You don't become inferior in your thought process. You bring to the table what that process is, and then you try to qualify that as you make others qualify theirs. So.
Thanks for that. And one point that really stood out on that is, you said don't try to accomplish it all, paraphrasing, but in the first conversation. I think that's really important. I mean, general negotiation is you do a lot of listening, is you draw them out and try to find out what they're coming from. And then that creates a basis for dialogue in the future. So I really appreciate that. I think that's helpful.
And Aquil, you have one more question from Catherine. I want to make sure she gets her question in.
Catherine, this is only going to take me a quick second. Scott, I want to use you as an example, you and your wife. You guys have had some extremely good community engagement conversations with a Better LA. Yes, you knew most of those people, a lot of those people, but they were people from a whole different sphere of backgrounds. And I will guarantee more was learned in those conversations just by being around those individuals and listening to them talk. So, I want to say in a microcosm, you guys have already held some of those community conversations, just need to be held on a larger basis. You got it, Deborah.
Catherine?
Catherine?
Aquil, actually, it's Katie. You might remember me from way back when.
I do remember you, Katie. How are you?
I've changed a little bit because of COVID. Now I'm a gray-haired old lady instead of a brunette. But anyway, I'm talking about COVID. How is it the social distancing and the inability to travel? And you're talking about communication. Well, communication is now severely restricted, and social distancing and all the rest. How do you continue to provide those excellent services that you've provided for so long in this new environment?
Well, that's a very good question. We have had to adopt and do quite a bit virtually, but so much of what we do is hands-on. So we're still able to bring that component to the table. I'm still able to engage my audience in scenario training. I'm still able to put them into situations because so much is already ingratiated in my PowerPoints, et cetera. So we're able to function. There's nothing like person to person, especially when you do the internalized engagements, because people's actions, characteristics, the way people look, you learn so much in that process. But we've been able to adopt that. I still travel, not to the same degree to certain key cities. We will do the social distancing, but even at that, it's hard because putting people in live scenarios, we can't really engage them that close anymore. But still, the live always supersedes. But in crisis work, what do? We learn to adopt, and that's what we have. The unfortunate thing is I'm probably more busy than I ever been because, see, when I go to the different cities, I'm on lockdown time. That city gets my full attention, etc. But now that I'm doing so much virtual, I probably increase the training threefold because, you know, once I'm off, the next day I can do another training because I'm at home. So, so we've been able to adopt. And for all of you that don't know Katie does outstanding work, has been for years. So I got to give you your props, Katie. Keep doing what you do, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We have about 8 minutes left, and I just wanted to go over a few conference things before we run out of time. Tomorrow, we will be starting promptly at 9 o'clock with the opener with me and Aquil and Sheriff McDonald. And also Anne Marie Johnson will be there as our keynote speaker. As we move through the day, and Bill will be on the panel after that with everybody also. Hi, Bill. As we move through the day, after every single presentation, except for the opener, we will have a Q&A where I will put everybody into breakout rooms according to their time. You will also have a host for each session and a Q&A person that will be in your room at that time. And so all people have to do, Scott actually figured it out, you can do the thumbs up or hi-fi emoji on your screen that I can see. I don't know if other people can see that. Or you can tell me in the chat, or you can tell me verbally when we say we have questions. And then someone will put you into that room. It will immediately bring you back in 30 minutes. There's a timer on it. You will get a warning. And it'll say this will end in 60 seconds. There's nothing for you to do, but it will bring you back into the main room. You can also leave early if you want to see the speaker that's on next, if you've asked your question and it has been answered. And so tomorrow should go relatively smoothly. If not, please bear with us because this is the first time we're doing this, and it is going to be very, very exciting. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat for your host or for your co-host to see, and we will be able to answer those questions. People who have my number can also text me. People were doing that today as Aquil was speaking, so I was multitasking on what's going on. But please feel free to reach out. You can also get up and leave whenever you want and eat or do whatever you need to do during this time. We are nonstop going until the end, and we also have, of course, my son's book signing, and we also have the happy hour that will happen at the end of the conference, which is great. But at the end of the day, Nita will be there to also get us jumping around and stretching and moving because we are sitting in these chairs for so long. And I'm wearing one of her t-shirts from the Self-Care Lab and Script. And also Script now has a bookstore. So all these wonderful people that you're hearing speak, you can also go get their materials, Keel's book, my books, other people's books who are speaking at the conference. Just go to Dr. Deborah's Things and More. But Christina will be blasting that out for everybody to get because you can go and buy all of the resources that you're seeing here. The PowerPoints, we can send those out to anyone who wants them. And we will be selling also t-shirts after the conference if you want to continue the experience on Amazon. So all of that is now available to continue the experience of Script all throughout the year, which is great. And the proceeds of those t-shirts will go back into the conference because Amazon will be printing them, getting the materials, doing everything. And so when they're sold, we get a commission from it, but all the money that we get will go into the conference for Script. So I hope that people do buy the t-shirts or buy one for other people, because then we can all have t-shirts next year, but we can also bring in revenue for the conference, which is a wonderful thing.
Good work. Good work.
Yeah. Anyways,
everybody.
Thank you all. No more questions. I will see everybody, and I see my team at 8:30 in the morning on this link. We will do a quick powwow, and then we are running for something we have been planning all year. Oh my God, like that has changed and grown, and into this with 377 people. I don't even know how I'm going to watch the screens, but we're going to do it, right? We're going to do this.
Everybody be safe. Appreciate all of you.
For you all, thank you.